Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about how to re-energize that same old training. This session will be recorded and we'll post a copy of it on our YouTube page as well as on our blog later in the week. If you have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer your questions in that questions panel. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can, and if there are some that we aren't able to get to, we'll try to answer those offline as well. All right, so to talk to us about how to re-energize that same old training, we have Amber Rodbell, our senior lead developer, with us today. Thanks, Amber, for your time. And without further ado, I'll stop talking and turn the time over to you.
All righty, thank you so much, Andrew. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this today. I was thinking of something that I could give that would be relevant, and I recently did this training and it was just, we had some great feedback, so I thought I would do this here today for this audience. We're going to talk about years and years ago, I was a trainer. And one thing I realized is that I was so interested in figuring out the why of training. Why are we doing this? What reason is behind it? And that was almost more important to me than anything else. So to understand the need and to create the fix for the company or department that would help them do a better or more efficient job was very exciting to me. And if you don't think it's fun to figure out that why and to create new and exciting content each time, then you should reevaluate probably your training goals and your job itself, because it should be fun and engaging for you. Now, today, our focus is kind of on instructor-led training, but all the lessons learned can be really applied or utilized in web-based training or blended learning and different types of training. So let's think about this. We get a new project, and for the sake of time, we're going to assume that you already know what your company wants or the department in which you're training, and we're hoping that they have given you your content and it's ready to go. Now, we know that that is not always the case, and sometimes we have to dig into the content more and talk to our SMEs and make it more relevant to our end user. We're going to assume, though, that this is compliance training, and our goal is to take this training from being a burden to becoming a fun learning task for the employee. So to do that, we're going to look at some easy, let's say even a lot of well-known things that will help you as you write your content. So I have 6 key points that we're going to review today. First, we want to create clear and concise content. We want to chunk our content into consumable content cubes. Our content should be conceivably cooperative or interactive, comical where appropriate, and we want to consider a multimedia approach. And of course, in today's world, it's very important that we create a social culture. So today we are going to talk a little bit about each, but we're going to spend most of our time on ideas for creating cooperative, interactive content with a multimedia approach. So let's begin. So the first point we're going to look at is creating clear and concise content. So what does that really mean? And how does that play out, especially with compliance training? Who of us enjoys participating in compliance training? I think if we could collectively look at everyone's faces, we all kind of frowned and said, oh no. This would include things like sexual harassment training, performance or pay training, regulation training. So we have to think about, well, what is it about those types of trainings that we kind of dislike? Because once we know the why, we can figure out a solution for that. So sometimes we know we can't actually change all the content, especially if there are legal ramifications to doing so. However, we can put it in a new light or state it in more layman's terms. By reading through the content and getting on SME calls, I think we can dramatically reduce the amount of content or simplify what the learner needs to actually take away from the training. So instead of babbling on about all the background of a regulation or maybe lengthy scenarios that wouldn't really apply in the average person's job, we can instead provide clear and concise points and takeaways. I always like to put these points in a handout with a notes section so the learner can write down notes or help them remember these key points later. If you kind of apply that to web-based learning, you can always incorporate a notes section there as well. So let's review here. We want to always reduce, reduce, reduce. Simplifying is key. We always want to remove irrelevant content. Only include the content that's applicable to a person's job or role. So that is very important in that case to understand who your audience is. We want to provide clear objectives or key takeaways. And we really want to encourage users to participate in the content creation via notes. The main point, though, is we really want to get to the point in all of our training. When our goal is getting to the point in the quickest, most engaging way possible, I think we all know that everyone is happy with that. Now, according to Microsoft and Time Magazine, the average person's time span these days is 8 seconds. If your sentences or points are longer than that, they're not going to be remembered. So always keep that in mind and have yourself a 8-second rule, and that should help a lot when creating content and really trying to keep your points concise. All right, next, we're going to move kind of into the key point 2. And that is creating what we call in the industry chunking or chunked content. We're going to say we're going to chunk it into consumable content cubes. Now, we've all heard that, and we've probably all spent a lot of time talking about it or teaching our teams about it, especially when creating e-learning and trying to get our point across in the quickest way. So George Miller actually formulated this chunk concept in 1956 as he presented evidence that the working memory is limited in capacity. So the pearl of wisdom here is that if a learner's working memory is full, then the excess information is just going to drop out or disappear. Now, that can be a big challenge for a course designer or for a trainer or anyone trying to train. It means that if you're explaining something complex and the learner must hold several factors in mind to understand it, you're going to need to chunk out that information into bite-sized pieces for them. One method to chunk content is to first break out the course into modules, then into lessons within the modules, and topics. Now, this is very effective. So I have a little activity we're going to do. On your screen, you can see that we have a paragraph here. Now, this is obviously pretty random. So read through it a little bit and let me know how, or just in your own space there, write out how you would first chunk it out into modules and then topics and then lessons within your topics. So take a minute or two to do that, and then we're going to review how we could have chunked that. All right, so now hopefully a lot of you have had a moment to at least have a couple kind of breakouts within this content here, even though it's kind of, like I said, it's very random. So you're probably like, what am I supposed to do with that? So here is how we chunked that out into content cubes. Our course, we decided it's going to be called geography, and we put in our main idea, and then we broke it out into the topic of social sciences, and then lessons about culture, societies, and economies, and then another topic about natural sciences and landscapes lessons and environment lessons. And instead of seeing just this paragraph and then page after page of content, I think for the end user, it becomes a lot easier to digest when they know what they're expecting from either a menu that they can click through, or with objections, or navigation that they see clearly what's going to be outlined within the content that you're presenting. So a good note for this topic would be to always remember to write content that is easy to remember and is reusable. this is important because a lot of organizations reuse their content in a lot of different scenarios, whether it's ILT or e-learning. And so that every single person doesn't have to start at scratch, you want to make all of your content very reusable for all. And hopefully house that somewhere everybody can obtain. All right, so are there any questions at this point or anything that I can clarify?
No questions that have come up so far, but I'll let you know if some do come up.
All right, perfect. All right, so next we're going to move on to key point 3. Our content should be conceivably cooperative or interactive. Now, there are lots of different ways we've all explored on making our content interactive. So let's discuss a few of those. We can play games. We always want to add in polls or QAs or scenarios, a lot of hands-on learning if it's ILTs, have questions and answers, have the time for people to really engage with each other and engage with the content. Now, I have an example for you today. I think personally, I enjoy games. So I like to make training interactive with a lot of games and a lot of time for team building and opportunities for users to really engage together. So especially though, when you're dealing with a dry subject like compliance, I feel like games really help it become interesting and really stick in their mind. So when you think of games, where do you get your information? Like where do you start? I think that's a big question for most people. I like to start with TV shows or game shows or board games. And I think if you start thinking down that road, really anything can turn into a learning game. One thing I did recently, I did ID's Got Talent. And this was a lot of fun. I like to use well-known TV shows. And everybody knows, well, mostly everyone knows what America's Got Talent is. And so we turned that into a game. Now, most of the time, as IDs, we're writing content for trainers. And as we know, a lot of trainers love to be the center of attention or love to have fun. So when doing so, we try to make lots of opportunities to allow them to have fun with doing this. And how many trainers would love to be a game show host, right? So one big thing to remember though is there are copyright challenges, so make sure you're not using their logos or anything like that. So in the training I did recently, we split up the team into 5 groups. And everyone has some sort of talent, and we didn't regulate what that had to be. And in 5 minutes, we put a timer for 5 minutes. And in their group, they had to pick a person or the whole group to represent their team. Then they were going to present the learning objective that we gave them. So what we did is we handed out pieces of paper to each team, and they had to then act out or sing or create this learning objective. And it was a lot of fun because the creativity that you then see in people when they're collaborating together is just, it was so much fun. It was great. So, and they did things that like I completely was surprised by, like I hadn't expected any of the outcomes that I got from my learning objectives. Now, then in order to take it a step further, what we did is I created a Facebook page. And in your training, if you can add a social media kind of touch to it, that would be great. So what we did is we created a Facebook page, invited everyone, and we had all of our attendees ahead of time. But even if you didn't and you were in a classroom, you could instruct them on how to get to a Facebook page or whatever you decide that you wanted to utilize. And what we had them do is we had preloaded answers. And as the different groups who had talent acted out or sang or tried to explain their learning objective, they went on and through polls, they were guessing what that learning objective is. So it was a fun way to have the end users understand what the learning objective for the training was, and also engage with each other and create new ideas, which really sparks a lot of then ideas that they can use in all sorts of training methods. Now, this is just one game that you could do, but you could virtually do a game with any idea, and you can make it work for your content. You just have to be a little creative. So my note for this topic really is always take time to make your training fun. All right, so the next topic is to be comical where it is appropriate. This is really important because you really want to create a positive training experience. I know that, this is kind of tricky, especially with compliance training and kind of dry subjects. It gets a little harder in those areas. So you don't really want to take a serious subject and make fun of it, or add humor in such a way that a learner doesn't really take your subject or topic seriously. But you can use humor with characters or funny or witty sayings that you can carry across your training till the end. I like adding in witty sayings and stories that have character names that are clever, like, maybe like Darla Do-Right or Friendly Frank, things like that. Especially when, there's so much opportunity for that in training, like sexual harassment training and things like that, where you can add that in, and it makes it comical, but it's still appropriate. Typically, when you make training a good experience or include something that makes a person smile, they're going to have a positive view then of that training. So always leave them with a smile, and that's going to make your training go better, your feedback be much better in evaluations, and overall, hopefully the experience for everyone is going to be a good one. All right. Now, next, we're going to talk about considering a multimedia approach and how we can use different types of multimedia in your training. Now, again, this is with ILT in that you can really do a lot with that. If you are doing web-based training, in and of itself, it's kind of a multimedia approach, but you still have the opportunity to add in videos, utilize PowerPoints, mobile technology, polling, things like that, and you can do so with that. So, like I said, you can use video, PowerPoints, mobile technology, Google Sheets or handouts. Today we're going to talk about an example that you could use with a Google Sheet. Google is great because it has all these free resources out there at your disposal that you can use and really incorporate in your training, and most places and most people have access and can get to them. Now, you can use Google Docs or a Google Sheet to create collaboration and to engage your learners. For example, as you're going through a training, you could have a joint Google Sheet where everybody in the room is taking notes and adding to notes. And really, at the end then, they can hit print and they have a full page of notes from everybody in the training class. And different people get different things out of training, so it really helps to open your eyes to something that, well, maybe while I was thinking about this point over here, they heard this, this, and this that I missed. So it's a great way for everyone to collaboratively take notes together. They also can then, download it for a reference point later, or utilize it maybe to take a test or assessment at the end. Now, another way I think Google Sheets work great is in team building. So one example that we recently did is we gave each team their own sheet. And we basically, at the bottom of the Google Sheet, each tab, it had a Team 1 tab, Team 2 tab, multiple tabs. Now, when they opened up their tab for their team, you would have a question for them. anything that you would want them to answer. I think in the example I based it on Addie. And so each team had a word that they had to unscramble. So they had 5 questions about the Addie process. And then it said things like, all right, within your answer, take the second letter and bring that down. And then in the end, all the letters that they brought down, they had to unscramble and create a word. And then they had to run up to the front and write that word on the board. And of course, whatever team got there first won. And so we had a first through, I guess, 5th place. And there was even a couple teams who they really couldn't even figure it out, because obviously if you don't answer the questions correctly, you can't unscramble the word. So it's a really fun way, though, that it got their teams talking. It also, if you would utilize it for a subject that you're trying to train, it gets them thinking about that subject, answering questions about that subject, and then just putting it in more of a game form. And you're utilizing Google Sheets, which is lots of fun because you can then keep those or look at everybody's responses. And some of them are funny because as we went through, we were like, that is not part of the Addie process, or with some of the answers to the questions were silly. So you're able to then go back through, and as we learn through mistakes, we can point those out in a way that says, hey, a better approach to this would be this, this, or this. So again, when I did this before, I used questions about the Addie process. But if you were writing content for compensation, you could ask specific questions on pay decisions or true-false questions, and then pick a letter from those. For HIPAA, you could have words that maybe needed unscrambled about all the HIPAA acronyms. And those things are so kind of dry to train on and can be really boring. But if you make it into a fun activity, it kind of sticks out in their mind, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember when I did that, and I think that the acronym was whatever. So for this section, I would say that your key takeaway would be, if you can think it up, then you can create it and you can incorporate it in your training. All right, now lastly, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about today is creating a social culture and what that means. Now, everybody knows that with just the utilization of your smartphone and online technology and social media, it's really, really important to start to think about at least adding that to your training. This can be hard because some organizations I know have put a lot of blockers in place, and so you can't always just, go onto Facebook or go onto Instagram. But a recent study suggested that people will look at their social media accounts at least 2 times per hour. And it was funny, when I did this training, I had set up a Facebook page, and even the page I set up, in the training, we tracked how many times people had looked at it. And it was really funny because literally when we averaged it out, they had looked at it more than 2 times per hour. And for the next 2 months, we tracked it, and it had been hit repeatedly, time and time again. So it is a really great tool to use. Now, this avenue is a great way to deliver chunk size content. One example of this would be, you could create your class, sign people up, and you could start delivering them pieces of the content a week before by sending it out on social media in daily chunks. So maybe you could find an engaging picture and just a key phrase from your training and send it out on your newsfeed, every day. Send out a new one for a week before the training. And that just gets them already thinking about that subject. It's in their mind. They're preparing for training. They're preparing to take this course, whatever it may be. It prepares their mind and it becomes their focus. Now, another way to utilize social media is for collaboration. You can create groups or pages that your learners can discuss things with each other. They could do it during the training. They could be, because honestly, they're probably going to be on social media anyway during your training. So you might as well have something set up so they're at least engaging with each other instead of ignoring the entire topic. So it's part of our culture to text and share with each other, and people do it hourly and every day. So it needs to be incorporated in how we do things. And it can be a fun way too. Like, you could take pictures of your class or participants, or if you were doing some sort of e-learning module, you could have them pick an avatar, and when they get to the end and they have their final score, they could take a screenshot and post things like that. And I know that with Facebook, there's a lot of ways you can make things private, and so a lot of organizations are more open to that. But there are actually also a lot of companies that have created social tools that can be customized and utilized within organizations that are very private too, that a lot of different organizations are kind of starting to adopt. I think one of them is called Hive, if I remember correctly. If you play games with in your training, you can post different things about that game as reminders of the topics. You could post pictures with people holding cards of learning content, and those cards will get read, and they'll hopefully start remembering those. You could also, one thing I did, which was funny, is we created an activity where the users created their own memes. And so they created a bunch of funny memes and they posted it to the site. And so it's a fun way that people start laughing, but it's all encompassing the content that you're discussing. You could also use, if you're doing a web-based training, there are ways that you can automatically have a Facebook button or Instagram button at the ends of your training so that they can click on them and go directly to a page, and their information can be carried over on their scores, or you could even have them do their evaluations of the course there, where they say, hey, I thought this content was great, but I really need to learn more about this, or whatever the case may be. So it's very
Amber,
important.
a quick question has popped up here.
Sure.
If you create a social media page and a non-exempt employee does work, would you have to pay them?
Meaning that if they did work on the page, or if
That's right.
they participated?
Oh, I imagine it's participate.
Okay, so no, I think that what I would do is I would explain to them that participation in the social media activities are to help engage them and to reinforce an idea, and it's for their benefit, and it's just an extra added benefit. I think that, it would be very hard to track how much time someone spent on social media. It's really more of a benefit of, hey, this is going to help you learn this, and thus it's going to help you do better at your job. But it's fun and it's engaging, and it's a way that you're learning without feeling like you're actually, head to the grindstone learning. So I don't think that you would have to pay them to utilize it. But I could be wrong. But that would be my as I'm thinking it through, that would be my thought, is that no, it's really just as kind of an added benefit to really help them learn the content better and have fun doing it.
Sure. Would a case like this be able to be adapted to a smaller training group, like just a couple employees, maybe less than 5?
Oh, absolutely. I've actually done this several times, and it was actually more fun when there were less people, because they ended up getting to know each other really, really well. And so it was a lot more engaging and funny when they would put up a meme, or they would say something that was about the content and they were talking, but they also had kind of background information about that person because it was a smaller group. So it became a lot more fun for them. And it was a very social climate. And that's the kind of climate we live in today. And when they're doing it for work, and so you're engaging them for work, they're not as interested then as, oh, I better go check my feed to see what I'm doing tonight for dinner or where I'm going tonight. They're really staying engaged in your training and they're engaging with each other on the topic. So I feel like in the end, they actually knew more about the topic and had discussed it more than other training groups where we had not used social media. So I think absolutely, I think sometimes that can even be more fun. And you can use it in large groups. We had a really large group, and so we actually made several different Facebook pages we took the large group and we broke it into like 5 smaller groups to make it a little bit more easy to control. So I would say less is actually better, because otherwise when you're having 100 people post on a social media site, that can somewhat, unless you have a really good person monitoring it, it can get to be a lot, because you really do want to be watching what's posted just in case somebody gets the bright idea to post something that is inappropriate, that you can take it down. There are also, at least on Facebook, there are ways that you can set it up that as the content owner, you can review what is posted before it's actually posted. And in certain organizations, that might be necessary, or on certain subject matters that may be necessary for you to do so.
And then there's one other question here, and another comment. How would you handle participants that don't have social media accounts? And then somebody else points out, for our organization, we use Yammer instead of Facebook. And so I guess there's other alternatives. Is that right?
There are. I've heard of Yammer before. I've heard of organizations using it. I'm not sure if you can create separate groups or pages with Yammer, but I think that you can, if I remember correctly, create I do think you can create groups. And so you could utilize that. If they don't have social media and you're using one of the big players like Facebook or Instagram, or I don't even know, I'd have to ask my teenage son what is all out there, but one of those, then I guess for the training, you could say, hey, we are going to be utilizing this. This is what we're going to be doing on it. And maybe for that training, they would be interested in downloading it just for that. And then they can, of course, delete it off their phones afterwards. I also did a handout outlining everything that I put on the social media Facebook page that I created, so that if anybody couldn't access it, they had a reference point during the activities. So I think that's a great way to do it, because inevitably somebody, as in all training, will have a connection issue of some sort. So it's good to always have a handout or quick reference guide or reference sheet of some sort that they can refer back to. A lot of people, if they were having issues connecting or getting to the page, they honestly looked over at their friend's phone and they were both doing it on there. And so it was another form of collaboration that they were able to discuss it with each other and help each other out with it.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, there's no other questions at this time.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have for today. So that's it for me.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Amber. This has been great. Amber, are you going to be coming to ELBX Live this year?
I'm not, actually, not this year.
We'll be making it. Okay, but if you guys would like to come to ELBX Live and meet some of our other developers, we've also got a lot of our custom team that Amber is working on. You can pick their brains and share some of your projects with them. They're always happy to give you some ideas on how to make better courses that are more exciting, how to re-energize them. If you want to chat with our custom team not at ELBX Live, there's information there on the left side of the screen. You can give us a call at 801-796-2767. We're happy to give you a consultation over the phone, or we can schedule something that's a little more demo-oriented. You can email us at info@elearningbrothers.com, or if you just want to take a look at some of the work our custom team has done, you can go to elearningbrothers.com, and there's a whole custom section in the top navigation bar. ELBX Live, as I mentioned, coming up on June 10th. It's coming up very quickly. Come and get inspired to rock. It's going to be a blast. We're partnered with Learning Dev Camp, so ELBX is on the first day, and then the next 2 days are Learning Dev Camp. So it's a great opportunity for you to come and hang out with a lot of other e-learning developers and designers and share your knowledge and learn a little bit from other industry professionals. As I mentioned earlier, this will be recorded and we'll get it posted on our YouTube page and on our blog later in the week. Thanks everybody. Thanks Amber for your time. We hope you guys can join us next time. Bye-bye.